I took Minoxidil for 8 weeks. Here is, first, why. Second, what I then did and decided to do, basically taking Minoxidil. You could also call it the decision. And third, we will have the results. Why? A few months back, I noticed my hair significantly thinning. It's not that it probably didn't before, it is just that I didn't notice before. As you can see here, the hair follicles seem to be not that many and not that dense anymore. And also the whole area, so the whole area you can quantify how much androgenic hair loss, male pattern hair loss you have by comparing yourself to the Norwood scale, which basically has the different recessions that go on over time on average, and you can basically calculate it yourself. So as I noticed this here, and as it seemingly didn't get better, I was urged kind of to turn that into something and to stop this apparent hair loss. Now, I would say it runs partially in my family, and as you can see, it also is now not that bad anymore. The question is why? Was it that bad, and why is it now not that bad anymore? Over the last 2 years, I grew out my hair up to about this length. What this potentially might have done is it increased the pressure on the scalp and also the individual hair follicles. Think of one hair being this long. It's 1 centimeter. Not that much weight, very light. So if there is a given hair follicle which has to hold 1 centimeter of hair, then this is probably on the lighter side. If you take the same hair and you multiply it by, let's say, 10 or even 20 centimeters, then you also multiply the weight. Of course, this is not just a theory, and there is also a paper that is in the process of either being published or already being published, which discusses basically this theory that on the scalp there are regions that are over time under more pressure, and therefore the hair miniaturization, which is the thing that occurs and then causes male pattern androgenic alopecia, male pattern baldness or androgenic alopecia, might be a result of this. So there seems to be a correlation between the areas that are usually the most tight over time, you could say, and the areas in which the hair then miniaturizes, so basically the hair follicle itself. If this is the follicle itself, the hair cell, and then the hair stands out here, it becomes smaller and smaller until it eventually just goes. In order to quantify my hair loss, I took a glass about this size, and over about 2 or 3 weeks I could fill up the glass. Whether this is normal or not, I did not really have a reference. Why? Because I had never that long hair before. Because the fact obviously is, the longer you hair, if this is 1 centimeter or if this is 10 centimeters, then of course this seems to be 10 times as much volume that is actually falling out. Why? Because it's just 10 times as much hair. Now, at a given hair falling out frequency, this now just seems to appear as if a lot more hair is falling out. You could call it a psychological distortion, which is not really psychological because it's a much more physical distortion that you might not realize if you not think about this. Now, treating it, there are basically 2 different routes you can go if you want to go just with medication. The first thing is finasteride. It needs to, in my knowledge at least, be prescribed. And the second one is called Minoxidil. So both have kind of different mechanisms of action. In order to understand the mechanisms of action, we have to understand why the hair are even falling out, which is still not entirely clear, as the recent theory showed that is not really proven yet, but I already told you about it. So as males grow older, there seems to be more and more DHT, which is dihydrotestosterone, which is basically part of the overall testosterone in your body. And this DHT, specifically in your scalp, if this is your scalp from above, seems to cause these hair follicles to miniaturize. Now, the more testosterone you have, potentially the more converts into DHT. So there are basically 2 mechanisms of action you could do in order to decrease the amount of DHT that is on these cells, next to these cells, your hair follicles, and thereby prevent or more latently cause then the hair follicles to miniaturize and eventually fall out. Also important to differentiate is that alopecia areata, where large chunks of head, not of head, but of hair follicles actually fall out, is a different disease, you could say. Even though that's not really a disease, it's much more a symptom of this whole DHT thing. I actually don't know if it is classified as a disease, probably. So if you have overall testosterone here, then part of it converts into DHT. Now, what you could do is you could just decrease the amount of testosterone that converts into DHT from overall testosterone. And this is the mechanism of action finasteride provides you with. The problem is that this is a hormone also, and hormones in your body have a function. Even though they might cause negative effects, DHT, for example, also causes beard growth. So for this reason, just reducing the overall DHT that's in your body has negative side effects, and there also seems to be not just a short-term side effect of lower libido, possibly more likelihood of depression, and so on and so forth. But there also seems to be a more latent effect that is a midterm side effect, maybe even long-term side effect, if we differentiate between these three different temporal categories of short, mid, and long-term. This side effect is called post-finasteride syndrome, and it seems to be evident in more and more cases. On the other hand, we have minoxidil. If this is basically influencing how your hormones work in your body, or how much of one hormone, testosterone, converts in dihydrotestosterone, then this here is a kind of different mechanism of action. So if a hair grows, there is a certain phase in which the hair grows and a certain phase in which the hair possibly falls out again or doesn't grow. And these are two phases. If we have these two phases in this one thing here, then let's say they are 50-50 in the beginning. If they are 50-50 in the beginning, then the hair grows and then the hair possibly falls out again. Actually, constantly, hair are falling out. The problem is just if more hair falling out then are actually regrowing, and then over time you have basically hair loss. Hair loss! So what minoxidil now does, it basically enlarges the portion of the anagen phase. I think it's called the anagen phase. Quoting, minoxidil is thought to induce an early anagen phase when it's applied to your scalp, meaning it can cause hair follicles to go through the rest of the growth process prematurely before starting to grow again. This is why some people experience hair shedding when they first start using minoxidil. I didn't experience the hair shedding, at least it was not at a higher frequency compared to before, where I already had kind of, at least in my view, in my biased perception, kind of a hair shedding. So the anagen phase seems to be the growing phase, and the other one seems to be the telogene phase. Therefore, the decision was kind of easy, because I didn't want to potentially have post-finasteride syndrome, and I also didn't want to have or experience the negative side effects of finasteride. In addition, the most recent advice, such as on episodes or on guests on the Huberman Lab, such as Dr. Gillette, seem to steer away from finasteride and more towards other mechanisms of action or treatments. Now, of course, not everybody experiences these side effects. Side effects are side effects, and a given medication has to, I think, have or not exceed a certain threshold of side effects, because otherwise it wouldn't be allowed as a medication. If the net benefit of a medication would be negative, then of course it would not really be probably allowed as a medication in a given country. So I decided to try minoxidil. Now, in terms of finances, this cost you about 60 euros, at least in my country, and in my country it's branded Regain, even though the company is the same, and in other countries this is available as Rogaine. It's just available as Rogaine. The first thing was a joke. Now, because I decided for minoxidil, I bought it, and it also seems to be available without prescription. And you also don't get it refunded by your insurance usually. Because it seems to be, at least in males, it seems to be a cosmetic issue, or it seems to be seen as a cosmetic issue and not as a health issue. So how to apply it? I cannot apply it now because it's very expensive. Not that expensive. It costs you 20 euros a month, which is basically 2 times a Netflix subscription. But what you have to do is you take this and it's applied as a foam. There were people online that said applying it as a foam is super impractical, and what you actually want to do is you want to have kind of a sprayer which then sprays out some of the actual solution. The upside of having a foam is that you have more volume. So if you then, I just take a little bit of it. So there is a cap, and the recommended dose is that you take this cap and you fill it up until half of it. So you take just some of it. I will now just take some of it. And what I did eventually is, because I know how much fits in there, I just have about the size of a grape in terms of volume, and then I just take it. And because I have 2 hands, and this is not just water or similar to a fluid that is then not injected, but applied on my scalp, I think this is actually a way more practical thing, the foam. So I take this foam and then I rub it in between my 2 hands, which also seems to be the thing that is recommended, because I try to do the thing that is recommended. And then you ideally apply it only to the areas that are basically the areas most likely where hair falls out, or where hair had fallen out in the past. So these would be these areas here, and maybe also this area here in the back. But what I also did is I just applied it throughout all of my hair. Now the longer the hair is, the more will get stuck in the hair, and the rest will be actually applied to the scalp itself. So to summarize it, Minoxidil is basically a fertilizer. You can just say it is a fertilizer. So I think Dr. Kyle Gillette on the Huberman Lab podcast also just categorized it as a fertilizer. And the other thing is, I don't know what you want to call it, but it just acts on your hormones in your body and on the conversion of testosterone to dihydrotestosterone, which again also has a function in your body, because otherwise it probably wouldn't really exist in your body due to evolution. Of course, there could also be things that evolution just hasn't optimized for that are still nevertheless there. Now we enter the third point, which is not here anymore, but it is the results. You saw the earlier pictures. You are seeing this now. I mean, you could basically in videos and then also photos already kind of see my scalp line basically. You also can partially see it now, but I think it is less visible. What I also did in between is I slightly dyed my hair, and I also slightly dyed these things that are here. But the dye only holds for a few days or weeks, and then it goes out again. So now my hair color is the normal color again. My beard color is not, because my beard is still a little bit lighter and I wanted it to be a little bit darker. So it is slightly dyed, you could say, but it also washes out again. So as you can see now, it is slightly better, I think. Now, the question, of course, is whether this is caused by Minoxidil, or by me cutting off my hair, or by me changing partially my nutrition, or by me doing slightly different things, or by me not eating the one thing that might have caused this in my nutrition, or by me eating, again, omega-3 fatty acids, whereas I maybe before didn't for a few days. I can't tell. But from what seems to be the most reasonable explanation is, I think, 2 things. The first thing is that by getting rid of my hair, and what I also experienced when I had the long hair was basically a constantly slightly inflamed scalp. So whenever I would touch my scalp and basically test whether I could stretch it, it was kind of itchy. It slightly hurt. And also, whenever you comb your hair and it is like 10 centimeters or 20 centimeters long, of course the hair falls into each other and maybe makes knots. And if you then take it and you don't hold it at the base, but you basically take the comb and apply pressure to the hair follicle in order to basically straighten the hair out, then of course this all goes onto the hair follicle. So what seems to be maybe part of the reasoning behind why the shedding stopped might be a different explanation entirely. And this different explanation entirely is stress-induced alopecia. So if you, again, go back to the two different phases, then if you experience a lot of stress, your body might be, oh well, this is not the best time to build new things, but maybe just stop. Then the hair falls out, but since it doesn't, it basically shortens the anagen phase, as I understand it, and therefore it seems that more hair is actually shedding. But of course, over the long term, this hair will grow back. And this could also have been the case. But what also could have been the case is it was a combination of all these different factors, and I obviously cannot ever really find out what was the actual thing that caused it, because it probably were many things that caused it. I think maybe a slightly induced stress, partially a stress-induced alopecia, you could call it. The second, probably an early onset of the actual androgenic alopecia I probably have running in my genes. And third, a partial reaction not to psychological stress, or I mean, what is psychological stress anyway, you could say. Or you could also not say, but maybe I shouldn't say it because I should not talk about things I have no idea about. But if you just categorize stress as overall stress to the body and the mind combined, then maybe stress-induced, but also partially inducing stress via having longer hair. As soon as I cut off my hair, there was kind of an instant relaxation effect just from cutting off the hair, and over the next days and weeks, I just now have a normal scalp again, whereas before it was like this thing that sat on top of my hair, on top of my head, where I didn't want to comb through my hairs because it was just constantly hurting. And also, obviously, Minoxidil might have helped a little bit. Can I actually say it was just Minoxidil and now I have my hairline back? No, it is still kind of visible. You can still kind of see through it. It depends, of course, obviously also on the lighting and on how I have my hair. And if I have my hair like this, then you can't see the hairline at all, but I also cannot see that much. And since I had longer hair, and longer hair tends to be worn in a slicked back look, then obviously you can also see the hairline all day long. Whereas the years before, maybe also my hairline already slightly recessed, and I looked at pictures before, and this also seemed to be the case. But I just didn't look at my hairline all day because the kind of hairstyle I had before just didn't make it apparent all day long. In total, what I will do in the next weeks, months, and years probably is, apart from introducing Minoxidil, is introducing a derma roller. So what is a derma roller? There seems to be an effect whereby by slightly pinching with a needle into the scalp with 0.5 millimeters, for example, and you do this maybe once a week, there seems to be a cascade of things that are happening that then again positively influence or positively prohibit, or you could say just prohibit, the miniaturization of the hair follicles. So if you hurt yourself, there needs to be some kind of regrowing, regeneration mechanism, and this seems to be the mechanism of action whereby you pinch your scalp and then it is a little bit inflamed, and then over time, if you accumulate the different effects, you have basically a latent miniaturization of the hair follicles, and thereby you temporarily forego the early onset of androgenic alopecia, and you basically procrastinate it, you could say. There are two different types. There are automatic ones and there are not automatic ones. The main downside, and this is also the reason I didn't get one, so it's basically just a roller similar to the ones you use for baking, and you just roll it on your hair. This is what it looks like. So it's basically this roller and you roll it on your hair. The main downside seems to be that if you roll it onto your hair, you might also cut off part of your hairs, which of course is a negative side effect, especially in androgenic alopecia you just might want to avoid. The other option is the automatic variant, usually a pen that has needles in it and also a battery. And if it looks like this, then what you can do with this is you just hold it onto your scalp, but of course it only has a very tiny area, which you then need to cover either just the parts where the actual hair is already falling out, or you just take the entire scalp. I'm not quite sure what is the best protocol. Also, maybe because of the effect of, then again, the potential of cutting off hair if you do this. But, I mean, if eventually all hair will fall out, then I think it might make the most sense to treat kind of all of your scalp with this thing. And this is what I might get into. This pen is about 60 euros. The other thing is, I think, 10 to 20 euros. So, because the pen is so this other thing is 10 euros. So it's comparably cheap. Maybe I just go with the roller first and then get into the pen. I don't know yet. A channel on the internet called MP. More plates, more dates. And Derek seems to be the one that is making the channel. According to him, there are also other devices. And I think it's called the Derminator. And this is just a bigger device. The potential problem with a bigger device is that your scalp is a sphere, and if you apply something like this to a sphere without the effect, so without the application device kind of being able to round to your scalp, then this might potentially cause different stitchings, not stitchings, but pinchings of the needles into your scalp at different heights. The pen has the advantage that it is a very small area, therefore the variation in basically the scalp itself in terms of the height towards the pen, because the pen ideally probably is at 90 degrees in any direction towards the scalp area, and then you just pinch it in order to achieve, let's say, 0.5 millimeters. If you just have a bigger device that has more needles, this effect is more strongly felt, and here you might have not any effect, whereas here you might have a stronger effect when the average result is 0.5 millimeters. Again, according to Derek, he does this ideally once a week, so this might be also something I'm going for. Another confirmation of this thing that I should be doing is that Brian Johnson, who is trying to maximally rejuvenate his body, is also doing a very similar protocol. He did not specifically mention minoxidil and finasteride, and he also said that he had a custom formulation. He actually posted recently an update to his project blueprint, and he also showed footage where he used, or somebody else used, a derma pen on him, in addition to the different hair solutions he applied to his hair, which were not apparent what kind of medication solutions these were. In addition, what he also uses is a LED cap, which he puts on his head, and that possibly positively influences also the miniaturization of the hair follicles. I think it is red light, but I did see it only in grayscale due to my phone being in grayscale, so I'm not quite sure about it. I took a few screenshots, and here he is taking PRP injections, positively influencing the whole thing. Possibly, not possibly. Positively. This is the cap he just wears on his head. Maybe that's just a little bit too much. I don't know. I don't have read the papers on this. He apparently has, and he also has 30 doctors apparently who oversee all of his organs in order to rejuvenate them, so he probably has a little bit more of an idea compared to me. And this is the derma pen he uses, and he also mentions here 0.5 millimeters as the needle depth. This is then the application. By the way, this is him, and this is his probably leading doctor. In total, this once again showed me that just worrying about things without diving into research and trying to take responsibility for something that appears, in my life at least, has shown to be at least somewhat beneficial. If I now know that I have to take something like this, or also do something like the derma roller, which seems to increase the efficiency of any medication, whether it be finasteride oral, whether it be finasteride topical, which still seems to have global effects, so you seemingly cannot just apply finasteride on the top of your head and expect that you don't have global effects on your entire body. And minoxidil also seems to kind of spread a little bit throughout the body, but I'm not so sure about that. So there seem to be some side effects where other parts of your hair or other hairs on your body also seem to grow more, like your beard because of DHT, but potentially also your chest hair. I did not experience such side effects yet. In total, it also could be that I just have this now, and it has no effect whatsoever, and I just am thinking it has an effect, which is then called placebo. but only if it works. If it doesn't work, then it's called nothing. And if it has a harm, then it would be even called nocebo. But since I do not believe that this harms me, I potentially don't have a negative side effect. So either I spend $20 a month for the rest of my life, or 20 euros a month for the rest of my life, without actually knowing that it actually worked. But I also don't really have an actual good experiment where I could know that it worked, because I obviously don't want to go off it and then experience the hair loss again, possibly putting me forward in my hair loss journey. If this is all of my hair, and if this is the point in time in which I have lost it all, then the question, of course, is why I would ever take something that positively influences this journey and puts it basically forward in time and shorten the pathway to the point in time at which I don't have any hair anymore.